Methamphetamine was first synthesized in 1888 by Japanese chemist Dr. Nagai Nagayoshi. In 1871, he traveled to Berlin and worked there for 12 years under the famous chemist August Wilhelm von Hofmann. Returning to Japan, he began researching an herb called Chinese ephedra, or mahuang. From this, he isolated one of the four forms of ephedrine from the plant, which eventually led to the synthesis of methamphetamine. It became commercially available after World War I as an asthma treatment. During World War II, the major belligerents, including Japan, Germany, the US, etc., produced massed quantities of methamphetamine for pilots, soldiers, and factory workers. This allowed them to stay awake for days on end, eliminate hunger, and improve alertness. After the war, Japanese companies marketed methamphetamine, with Dai Nippon Pharmaceuticals producing the most popular brand known as Philopon, using the Greek word philo, meaning love, and ponos, meaning labor. It was sold as a cure for low blood pressure, sleepiness, and sluggishness since 1941. With the government's approval and no limitation. When the Occupation Administration took over in 1945, SCAP confiscated and restricted Philopon distribution to the public. However, instead of the supply being destroyed as it should have been, a lot of the confiscated stimulants found its way into the black market. In 1948, it was estimated that 5% of males in the ages of 16 and 25 were addicted to methamphetamine, with other surveys finding that 30% of those aged 20 to 22 have tried and are taking stimulants. At the time, there were no jobs, many food shortages, and much economic despair. Many Japanese resorted to alcohol and drugs to cope with this horrible situation. Drug addiction was only one of the many societal issues at the time, but due to its long-standing global association with dependence, the Philopon addict became a national symbol of Japan's post-war condition. Powerless, anxious, bullied, weak, dysfunctional, and inferior. As Miriam Kinsberg notes, the national response to the crisis was a result of the desire for change in Japan's collective identity, a desire to be perceived as confident, strong, functional, and independent. Although government concerns were rapidly increasing, many people still used Philopon regularly. An article, Philopon wa Dounaru, published in the Journal of the Japan Medical Association in 1950 stated, "The use of the medicine has spread over all social classes. When I met many journalists in a meeting and asked them about its use, I was very surprised to find that almost all of them have been using it regularly. Of course, they suggested that its use is not due to addiction, but to the need to make work productivity rise. They excused it as follows. If companies pay well, we do not need to work until late at night to use such stuff." Blame fell on certain groups of immoral people abusing the drug, such as entertainers and novelists. The consensus was that more people like office workers were more than capable of using the drug healthily without negative issues. In June 1951, the Japanese Diet enacted the ban on stimulant drugs, which came into force the following month. By December, police had arrested nearly 10,000 suspected violators, over 80% of Japan's drug offenders that year. Philopon was also implicated in various robbery, arson, rape, extortion, assault, fraud, and larceny cases. Ironically, as Kingston points out, the crisis coincided with the resumption of self-rule. As wartime stockpiles were exhausted, dealers began manufacturing Philopon domestically. Police exposed 87 labs in Osaka in 1953, mostly small mom-and-pop operations. On April 20, 1954, Hosada Kyoko, a primary schoolgirl, was found murdered in a bathroom stall at her school. Her body had been violated. The crime outraged the Japanese public and sparked an intensive 2-week police search for the perpetrator. On May 1, police arrested 20-year-old Sakemaki Shukichi, an unemployed man with tuberculosis. At the time of the murder, Sakemaki had been injecting 20 to 30 doses of Philopon daily for 2 years. Although methamphetamine distribution has been restricted in 1951, Sakemaki's horrific crime prompted various social groups, including parents, teachers, and doctors, to call for more stringent action against the drug. In June of 1954, after the killing of Hosoda Kyoko, the Diet increased the scope of the ban on stimulants and mandated heavier punishments for violations. Even then, at the end of the year, there were still 1.5 million Japanese who used methamphetamine, according to the Asahi Shimbun. By then, highly publicized drug busts became the norm. One case in Osaka in July of that year mobilized 2,000 police officers to search 800 buildings, leading to over 300 arrests. In the same year, the number of suspects taken into custody increased more than 150% compared to the previous year. Police statistics showed that 70% of the illegal meth labs were run by Koreans. However, they failed to indicate that the police specifically targeted the Korean villages of East Tokyo for drug raids. They, alongside with the Taiwanese, were considered third-country citizens and were a targeted minority during the Philopon crisis. Other reports talked about the death of celebrities such as Miss Wakana, a comedian who died of a heart attack. Although Wakana had been clean for 2 years, the newspapers seized it as an opportunity to discourage methamphetamine use. While various social groups, doctors, the media, and the government called for stringent action against the drug, especially after high-profile crimes like the murder of schoolgirl Hosada Kyoko, Japan's mental health law was amended to provide for drug recovery treatment for addicts, as well as improved care for those who were diagnosed as mentally impaired by extensive Philopon use. As the penalties for illicit manufacture of stimulant drugs increased, Japan's National Police Agency began to record a remarkable decline in stimulant drug arrests, with 90% less stimulant-related arrests in 1956 compared to 1954. Mobilizing against the drug became a way for Japan to forge a new national identity as an independent, modern nation moving past wartime trauma and occupation. Unlike drugs in other contexts, methamphetamine was not deeply embedded in Japan's post-war political economy or culture. This lack of entrenchment made its relatively swift suppression possible in the mid-1950s. However, the very success in eradicating Philopon sowed the seeds for the drug's resurgence in the 1970s. The second stimulant epidemic reflected Japan's rapid economic growth through the Jimu and Iwato booms that transformed the nation into a globalized consumer society. As a result of rising incomes, leisure time, and participation in global consumer culture, the demand and intentions for taking recreational drugs changed and developed to fit new lifestyles, as well as youth culture. Those who used methamphetamine were no longer predominantly night shift workers and students studying for exams, but pleasure seekers. This, alongside the fact that Yakuza groups dominated the supply and distribution of legal drugs in partnership with transnational syndicates, made the problem harder to eradicate as a localized issue. As use increased, the Japanese government implemented a new stimulant control law in 1985. In the same year, a record amount of methamphetamine was seized, totaling 300 kilograms. Despite the sharp increase in stimulant seizures, there was no apparent effect on the rate of stimulant use, its street prices, or the demographics of its users. By 1999, arrest statistics suggested that there were between 400,000 and 600,000 frequent methamphetamine users in Japan. This number is about the same today. Unlike in the 1950s, IV drug users were unable to purchase needles and syringes from pharmacies. As a result, studies found high levels of needle and syringe sharing, and little or inadequate cleaning of injecting equipment, and the resultant spread of HIV. Although meth today is very seldom produced domestically, the press has continued to sensationalize the drug trade and blame the bulk of it inaccurately on Japan's immigrant population. As Japan looks to the future, it is crucial to address the persistent challenges posed by illicit substances. This includes combating stigma and discrimination, providing accessible and effective treatment options, and promoting harm reduction strategies such as access to clean needles and syringes. By learning from its past and embracing evidence-based approaches, Japan can work towards a healthier, more resilient society, one that is better equipped to tackle the complex issue of substance abuse in the 21st century. Thank you.